All right, everybody, I am back. And today, since I finished up with reviewing that meta-ethics video last time, in our endless quest to review every single video on all of the internet on meta-ethics, I'm continuing the quest. So there's more and more videos, but this time I'm going to be doing something a little different. This time there was a tweet, and let me see where it's at right now. Okay, it's got 40,000 likes. It's got, excuse me, 4.1 thousand reshares and 585 responses so far. So there is a lot going on with it. So let me put that in the comments and I will pin it so that everybody can see the link and follow along with the tweet. And I'll try to put it up on the screen. I think I could do that. And let's see, spiritual psychotherapy services. I just see a little plant emoji or something. You're the first, so you get 1,000 Lance loot. Travis is here, and Travis gets 500 Lance loot, and Travis gets an extra bounty of another 500 Lance loot. We got to keep the I said I was going to keep the inflation down, but I already gave it out, so it's too late. But that's not enough, right, Travis? I got to incentivize you. So let's give you a full total of 2,000 Lance loot. Never before happened on this channel. You get 2,000 because if someone tips me off and I get good material to work with, that's even better than just showing up first. Showing up first is great, but tipping me off, that's a good way to do it. And if you do have videos or tweets or articles or something you'd like me to review, it could even be an academic article. I'm happy to review those. It's a bit much to ask me to review a book. You're welcome to send them my way. I might eventually have a look at a book. That's more the kind of content I would prepare for. I wouldn't handle that in a live stream. But you're welcome to recommend anything my way on meta-ethics, and I'm happy to have a look at it. And I'll be doing more academic content at some point on the channel. It's not always going to be YouTube videos. All right, and man, I do that thing where I start a stream. I could talk the whole day, and then I start a stream, and then suddenly my throat's like, "Nah, we're done," and it betrays me, and I just cough up a storm. I'll be okay though. In fact, this time I got some mint tea to really help with that. All right. So 1,000 for spiritual, 2,000 for Travis and Ben Singleton. You get 500 or 250. And that's everybody for today. And we got Facundo. I haven't seen you in a while. How are you doing? Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. So Travis sent me this tweet. I thought the tweet was well worth discussing to the point where I think I should be able to screen share and put it on here. Let's see how that works out. But let's just get right into it. I don't see people throwing questions at me or anything like that. So for those in the chat, you're welcome to ask questions about my review or ask me general questions. I guess I was going to say general questions in general, which is ridiculous. But if you got questions for me, throw them at me. I'll decide whether I feel like responding to them or not. It would be nice if it's focused on the topic and the stuff that I'm reviewing, but you can talk about whatever you want in the chat. I want people involved. I like the engagement. It's fun for me. All right. Enjoying Italy. Awesome. Let's go. I have not been to Italy. I would love to go. All right. So let's see if this is going to work. And I don't have to worry about volume this time. So yeah, there we go. All right. Give me 1 second so I can check one thing. All right. Yep, that messed it up. Is that going to keep working? Yeah, it is. Okay. Let's go back to that. So this is a tweet from Henry Shevlin. And Henry Shevlin is, I think, a professor somewhere. Let me look up. I think at Cambridge. Let's see. Henry Shevlin. Yeah, philosopher and AI ethicist, he's professor at the University of Cambridge, and it looks like he does some really cool stuff. And I've heard from some people that I consider very reliable. He's a great guy that I should talk to him. So first of all, I am going to critique the comments here, but it's not out of spider malice. It's out of I don't know, my crusade to defend anti-realism against what I take to be mischaracterizations, misunderstandings, and weak criticisms. And so that's what I'm motivated to do. So we could disagree on the matter, but he's welcome to drop by the YouTube channel or to otherwise, reach out to me and engage with me. I might send him an email, after this at some point and see if you'd like to come on and talk about this, because I don't like what I see here. I have some criticisms, and that's what we're going to get into. Okay, so let's have a look at this first post. It's this one right here. And here's how it goes. Teaching ethics to undergrads in 2025 is bizarre because, one, they insist morality is entirely relative and culturally constructed, and then ... Two, while simultaneously holding unshakable ethical convictions and viewing disagreement as moral monstrosity. So let's go through that again. Teaching ethics to undergrads. See, I hate when I screw it up. I just want to get through the whole thing without screwing anything up. All right. Teaching ethics to undergrads in 2025 is bizarre because, one, they insist morality is entirely relative and culturally constructed, but two, while simultaneously holding unshakable ethical convictions and viewing disagreement as moral monstrosity. Now, I didn't see follow-ups. I saw other people responding. I didn't see this as a continuous thread. So if there's more to this thread that I'm missing, I apologize. I didn't see it. It looks like what's supposed to be bizarre is taken to be obvious, or it's implied. I don't find anything bizarre about this. So, we could puzzle over what's supposed to be bizarre. But what we see here is that you have people that are relativists that appear to have unshakable ethical convictions, and they really don't like moral disagreement. Now, what's bizarre about that? As far as I could tell, absolutely nothing. There is no inconsistency or tension or contradiction in being a relativist or thinking that morality is culturally constructed and having very unshakable convictions. What would the tension be? What would the problem be? So, if let's say you're a relativist and you're an individual relativist, so you think moral facts are facts about the moral standards of individuals. So if someone says something like abortion is morally wrong, that's best understood to mean something like I disapprove of abortion. Now, if you have a set of moral standards, a set of facts about what you approve of morally, what you disapprove of morally, and you do not think that they're objectively true or stance independently true, they're just your personal values, is there anything especially weird about those convictions being unshakable? If so, what? Why would stance independent moral facts be the sorts of things that it would be appropriate for those to be unshakable, but it's somehow inappropriate for relativistic or culturally constructed standards? Why? I'd love to know what the issue is supposed to be. Think about when a person has a personal moral code. They're like, this is just the code I live by. And they don't try to impose it on anybody else. That's just a code they live by. Those people that have a kind of personal code are often super intransigent and incorrigible and totally unwilling to consider any alternatives other than complying with that code. It's just a way that people often can be. Now, we're going to look through some of the comments that follow from this, but I don't know what the issue is supposed to be. Now, you can imagine a potential issue, and this would be an issue where someone is an agent relativist. Now, recall there is an important distinction to be made between agent relativism and appraiser relativism. So let's review that. So agent relativism holds that moral facts are right or wrong according to the standards of the agent performing the action or the culture of the agent performing the action. And on this view, individuals or the cultures individuals come from effectively legislate or determine what's morally right or wrong for people within that culture or for those individuals in a way that everyone everywhere is thereby obligated to respect. So it's as though each person or group fixes the moral standards for themselves in a way that is then universally binding on everyone, not just on themselves, but everybody else. So if you have a group of people that say engage in human sacrifice, on this view, it's, let's say you're a cultural agent relativist, it's morally permissible for that culture to engage in ritual human sacrifice, even if it wouldn't be morally permissible for another culture to engage in human sacrifice. It's good for that culture to do so. It's permissible for that culture. And if you come along and you encounter this culture and they're engaged in human sacrifice, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for you to say, hey, you shouldn't do that. That's morally wrong. Well, morally, no, it's not. It's morally wrong relative to what standard? Because what makes their actions right, or permissible at least, is their culture standards. And since their culture approves of human sacrifice, then it's okay for them to engage in human sacrifice. And you can walk on by and leave them alone because it's totally morally permissible. In fact, it'd be wrong for you to try to stop them from engaging in human sacrifice because that culture fixes or determines what's morally right for that culture. That's agent relativism. Now, The alternative to this, and there's a variety of different distinctions or orthogonal distinctions that you could potentially come up with. You could relativize things to individuals or groups, and it doesn't have to be cultures. In principle, you could relativize to a species, or relativize to a location, or relativize to people's names. Relativism is consistent with any type or schema for relativizing, but just culture and individual are the most common ones. So that's agent relativism. Appraiser relativism, on the other hand, holds that moral claims are true or false relative to the standards of the agent judging or evaluating the action in question. So let's go back to the case of human sacrifice. So you have a culture that engages in human sacrifice. They judge their practice of human sacrifice to be morally permissible. Okay, so they judge it to be morally permissible. Now you come along and you say, hey, you shouldn't engage in human sacrifice. That's morally wrong. Are you right now? Well, here's how the appraiser relativist evaluates your claim. They evaluate your claim not as being true or false relative to the standards of whoever you're judging. That's agent relativism. So in the case of agent relativism, you would judge the culture by the standards of the culture. And so since they approve of it, your statement would be false. It actually is permissible on agent relativism. But on appraiser relativism, you judge them relative to your own standards. And so now the statement, hey, torture is morally wrong, you shouldn't do that, means something like, hey, I disapprove of you carrying out sorry, I said torture. Human sacrifice. Hey, I disapprove of you carrying out human sacrifice. Well, if you do disapprove of them carrying out human sacrifice, then your statement is true because that's what your statement means. In other words, the analysis of the statement, hey, human sacrifice is morally wrong, is, hey, I disapprove of you engaging in human sacrifice. And because you do disapprove of them engaging in human sacrifice, your statement is true. So appraiser relativism allows you to judge other cultures by your standards, to judge other individuals by your standards. In fact, you could judge everybody, everywhere in the whole universe by your standards. So there would be no issue at all with condemning the practices of other cultures. Now, when we look at this statement, we see, wow, is that 1.4 million views? That's wild. That's wild. Meanwhile, I have 16 people watching me. So whatever, that's just the way the world is. So they insist morality is entirely relative and culturally constructed. Okay, so relative in the appraiser sense or the agent sense? It's not disambiguated. And we've seen this with other critics. Over on TikTok, I had an exchange with Nathan Nobis about a year ago. And I've seen numerous other critics, including professional philosophers, that will critique, quote unquote, relativism without distinguishing agent and appraiser relativism. Agent relativism is subject to the kinds of concerns that could readily give rise to certain sorts of tensions. Imagine this tension. You're an agent relativist. You think it's morally wrong to steal. Okay, so that makes it morally wrong for you to steal. But now someone accosts you on the street and says, hand over your wallet. Well, if they go and they say, hey, and I think it's totally okay to rob you. It's totally okay to take your wallet. Well, it is morally permissible for them to take your wallet. So what are you complaining about if they're trying to take it? So agent relativism can run into issues where trying to impose your standards on other people to stop cultures from engaging in human sacrifice or to stop people from robbing you, that might not be consistent with agent relativism. But what about appraiser relativism? It simply doesn't have that problem at all. Appraiser relativism allows you to judge other cultures and hold them according to your own standards, and to judge other individuals. If a person comes up and says, hand over your wallet, you can judge their actions to be wrong relative to your standards. So you'd say, no, it's wrong. And there's no tension, there's no inconsistency, there's no problem. And so when he's pointing here to this inconsistency or this tension between being a relativist and having unshakable ethical convictions, is he talking about agent relativism or appraiser relativism? Because this especially makes very little sense if you're an appraiser relativist. There's no tension or inconsistency in having strong moral convictions and acting on them, but not thinking their stance independently true or false, and just being an appraiser relativist. And for the appraiser relativist, you don't even have the issue that there would be something morally prohibited about imposing your moral standards on others. And so this would make, note how he says, and viewing disagreement as moral monstrosity. There's no problem for the for the appraiser relativist and viewing disagreement as some kind of monstrosity. So there might be some presumption here that the relativism in question is a type of agent relativism. But even then, is there any real issue with having strong moral convictions as an agent relativist? It's not clear to me that there are. So I'm really not buying that there's a big issue here. All right. So let's have a look at what people say in the chat, and then we'll start looking at some of the responses. Deus Ex Nihilo says, why do they always think that to be a relativist, you have to accept any and every view independent of yours? I don't know. For whatever reason, critics of relativism seem to think relativism just is agent relativism, and that what you are, if you're a relativist, is someone that thinks it's up to each person and each group, or maybe both, to determine what's right or wrong for them, and then you have to respect that and tolerate everybody doing whatever that they morally approve of themselves. That's only one type of relativism. What about appraiser relativism? So for whatever reason, critics of relativism construe it only in this particular way. And I actually prefer to call this, jokingly, a la carte realism, because note what is so objectionable about this type of relativism. It's actually a type of relativism that has more functional similarities to realism than it does to appraiser relativism. Agent relativism actually makes it the case that if other people have different moral standards than you, this legislates or binds you or has authority over you, independent of your own goals, standards, and values. So if someone else thinks it's okay to torture people, that actually makes it the case that now you're obligated, independent of your own values, to be okay, to not interfere with that person torturing people, even if they do it right in front of your face. You just have to be okay with it. And so note that this agent relativism actually is very similar functionally to realism, but it's a kind of realism where different individuals or groups are subject to different sets of moral standards. But the overarching framework is binding on everybody in a way that nobody can escape from, and that everybody is obligated to conform with. That's very, very functionally similar to moral realism. It's still a type of anti-realism because the moral facts in this case are stance-dependent. But the objectionable feature of it is this normative implication that follows from the authoritativeness of the moral facts that are created by individuals or groups. So the objectionable features are the realist-like features. It would be very similar to if it turned out moral realism is true and we're required to torture people or commit human sacrifice. I would find that objectionable. I'd be like anti-morality at that point. Now, some realists will say that's impossible, whatever. I don't, they're welcome to say that. I think that there's problems with that. But the issue here is just that its objectionable features are not really fundamentally, I want to say, they're not exclusively meta-ethical. They have normative moral implications. Appraiser relativism does not have those normative moral implications. And so there's something weird, suspicious, and I think pretty objectionable about only focusing on the more vulnerable type of relativism, and then just presenting that as if it's relativism simpliciter, as if in refuting or raising objections to appraiser relativism, you have raised objections to relativism full stop. You haven't. There's still appraiser relativism. And there's other types of constructivism. So thinking that morality is culturally constructed doesn't even require you to be any sort of simple relativist. You certainly don't have to think, if you're a constructivist, that moral facts are determined by cultural consensus or a simple majority or anything like that, or by mere individual appraisal. You could endorse some more sophisticated type of constructivism, some type of account where there's some procedure or process you have to go through in order to determine what the moral facts are. They might be the facts that a ideally rational and fully informed agent would endorse. So you could be a constructivist of that kind. You could be some type of Humean constructivist, and then you might hold the descriptive view that most people actually have pretty good values, and they hold lots of these heinous views because of false non-moral beliefs, something like that. There are lots of ways to endorse a constructivist view that don't require a crude type of relativism. Okay, let's keep going with the comments. All right. Do they think that moral relativism entails trivialism? I don't think so. Vakunda says, well, I wouldn't say that morality is entirely relative to someone's standards. You could be objectively right or wrong about how to achieve what your standards demand. Yeah, but that's totally consistent with relativism. Relativism is just fixing or determining what's right or wrong relative to your values. It's not a view about the non-moral facts, a view about what the facts are about as to what would be most conducive to achieving those values. So let's say you're a relativist and you want to maximize utility. So you think that you should try to optimize the total amount of well-being in the world and minimize the total amount of suffering. Well, you don't have to be a relativist about what would in fact maximize utility in order to be a relativist of that kind. But the fact that on your view, it's morally good to maximize utility, that can be true. And that's not determined by non-moral facts that are independent of your own stances. So your stance is just determining, in this case, what the moral, like the normative moral standard would be. It's not determining what the correct or incorrect means of best complying with that standard would be. Totally consistent with relativism. Deus says, as far as I know, in practice, moral realism makes no difference in the issue. If moral realism is true, then it is consistent with anyone claiming whatever standard they hold is the objectively correct one. That's what I think. Yeah, I don't, moral realists will sometimes say, well, whatever the moral facts are, they're necessary. Sure. Unless you pair that with certain sorts of epistemic considerations that will fall outside the direct scope of metaethics proper, it's logically possible for them to be anything. I haven't, when I've presented cases like, well, what if it's stance independently obligatory to torture people forever? Some people will say that there's some kind of logical contradiction in that. I haven't seen a convincing case for what that logical contradiction might be. So, I mean, you could get there, but only at the cost of triviality. So if you define, for instance, suffering as something that it would be morally bad for it to happen, or it's bad for the experiencer to have it happen to them, then you could like wriggle your way towards some sort of trivial way in which certain sorts of facts are trivially impossible for moral realism. But it's largely by more or less stipulating or just insisting that there's some sort of logical entailment of certain sorts of facts being morally bad. It's not going to get you anything that I don't think is completely trivial. All right. Hayden, when you say quality, not quantity, I'm not sure what you're referencing. Sapir says, clipping is peaking out. Maybe your gain is too high. I moved the mic back. Maybe the mic was too close. Let me know if it's better now. So Hayden says, most absolutists obviously deliberately strawman relativism, or they're just generally ignorant. So I'm putting this on here even though I don't agree. I don't know that people deliberately strawman relativism. I don't know what's going on here, but I don't think it's intentional strawmanning. All right, let's see what else we have here. Blabbit says, is agent relativism seriously defended by contemporary moral philosophers? It seems like a really strange view. No, in fact, I've never met anybody that on reflection appears to endorse this view ever in my life. I don't know anybody that thinks this. There probably are some people. I don't know of any philosophers that endorse agent relativism. So that doesn't, like this, he's talking about undergrads in a class though. So it's possible that the undergrads endorse agent relativism. Hayden Walton says, viewer numbers. Well, quality over quantity. We certainly, and I'm up to 26 now, so that's 10 more. We probably have a better ratio of quality to quantity, but in absolute terms, if you got 1.4 million views, there's going to be a lot of great people that have seen your post. So, hey, someone can post this video on Twitter and then as a reply, and maybe it'll get a reaction. That would be nice. Sapir is saying that can anyone else help me out with that? How is it sounding for other people? Okay, I turned the gain down a little bit. Sapir, is that a little better? And if others want to comment to the sound, I haven't had audio issues in a while, so if someone can let me know if you're having any issues. All right. How is it now? Let me know, Matt, because that's 2 people, which means that the problem is very likely on my end. Okay, so what could be going on here is that, well, let's have a look at some of the specifics here. So here's a few concerns that I have. First, he says they insist morality is entirely relative and culturally constructed. Okay, fair enough. That seems fairly clear and straightforward to me, although I still have issues with what exactly people are likely to mean when they say that in a undergraduate student context. Because in my experience of teaching students, I'm not typically teaching philosophy classes, but I do teach classes where the topic comes up. If you start unpacking what people take relativism to be, there are quite a few conflations. People often conflate relativism with descriptive claims about the existence of variation in people's moral beliefs, or normative questions about the importance of tolerating other people with different moral standards. And those are not metaethical claims. All right. So I will turn. Okay. I've turned the gain down to the minimum. How does it sound now? Like it's at the minimum. So I can't turn it down any more than that. Responses. Okay. So in any case, when he makes claims like, while simultaneously holding unshakable ethical convictions, it's a little unclear. So first of all, we have this ambiguity about what's meant by relativism, but then what is meant by, okay, so Pierce says is something else. Dang it. Why is there always a technical issue? All right, I turned off automatic volume adjustment, so I turned it down a little bit. How does it sound now? Does it sound any better? Okay, let me know about the volume as I keep going. So, man, where was I? So we've got this alleged tension. I'm not seeing a tension here, but we also have remarks like this: unshakable ethical convictions. So there's no inconsistency between being a relativist and having unshakable moral convictions. So an unshakable conviction would just be a conviction you're unwilling to consider changing. What would be the inconsistency about that? And then, as far as having a problem with moral disagreement, that might be an issue for agent relativism. It's really not an issue for appraiser relativism. All right. I apparently have some kind of audio issue, and it's very distracting for me, but I don't want to keep talking about it. So we'll just keep going. I guess I'll check the audio later. And if it's really an issue, I'll just redo the whole video. I don't care. Okay. So let's start looking at the comments. So I've got this one. I've had a lot of students who couldn't articulate why they held the ethical convictions they did, but were entirely sure that they were right. Okay, that though has very little to do with relativism or any type of anti-realist position. That would just be, I know I'm right, I don't know why I'm right. So that, not really an issue. That's consistent with realism or anti-realism. On the other hand, some could articulate exactly why. Well, they could give a reason. It might be confabulatory. The students who could do that were most likely to accept that some people might not agree. Okay. All right. So Henry says, beautifully put, and I completely agree. Wisdom doesn't need to lead to relativism, but it should give insight into why disagreement occurs. Okay. I don't have much to work with there. So let's keep going with other responses. There's 23 responses there. So maybe we'll come back to that, but I'm not seeing something to jump on there. So Christoph says, I can relate. Is this your experience specifically with philosophy undergrads or with any disciplines? So Henry says, philosophy and AI ethics, but I think it's a wider phenomenon. The striking contrast for me is the students I was teaching around 15 years ago. Back then, a more thoroughgoing liberalism was the norm, with greater appreciation for moral disagreement. So is the idea here that people are really opposed to moral disagreement? Okay. Okay, well, that's not really very nice of some of these people. Might be worth responding to. Here's one. Our dominant philosophies are inherently subjectivist, and all the schools are pushing such. You may, in fact, have to take these kids back to metaphysics and build them back up through all the stages of philosophy before they can even touch any kind of ethics. I mean, it seems like the idea is, hey, they're subjectivists or they're taught subjectivism. Is the idea that this is a problem, and so we need to like reteach them things from the ground up so that we avoid the problem? What's the problem? I'm much more inclined towards subjectivist views than realist views. I take realism to be the problem here. So if people are being taught some sort of subjectivist or anti-realist view, all else being equal, I mean, maybe they're not taught it very well. Good. We don't need to go back and teach them anything new. It's really troubling when people just treat it as a foregone or conclusion or a presumption that there's something wrong with students being relativists and that this is something that we need to avoid. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of them are focusing on the disagreement part. So you get this remark from sociology textbooks. One, cultural values, beliefs, and norms are historically and geographically relative. Well, who knows? I don't even know what that means in sociology. Is it a descriptive claim or is it a meta-ethical claim? Mainstream culture is produced by dominant organizations and institutions. Meaning is produced and derived from language. Western civilization is bad. Clown sign, like clown emoji. Don't know what to do with that. All right. Maybe there's not going to be a whole lot. I have other videos and tweets lined up. So if we're not finding a lot to jump on here, then we could move to something else. So Koala says, I don't find it bizarre for a moral relativist to have unshakable ethical convictions. The whole point is that there's no universal standard for what is good, only an arbitrarily subjective personal view. Yeah. So there's a person that's like, I don't see what the problem is. And I agree. So this person says, I think it's only partially a problem. The important distinction is the last part, and viewing disagreement as moral monstrosity. Without it, these two statements can easily be true at the same time without cognitive dissonance. For example, personally, okay. Yeah, no, I'm not finding much of interest in these responses so far. So this person says, you should audit some of your students' other classes, see what your peers are teaching them. Is there a problem with what they're like? What is the problem with students being subjectivist? Is the issue here, or relativist, or thinking reality is culturally constructed? Is that the issue here? Is the issue here that they hold that view and then like are intolerant of moral disagreement? Like, depending on the moral disagreement in question, I might be more like if they're like, hey, I'm really against all the genocides. Well, good for them. They should be against genocide. But if it's like, hey, this person has a slightly different moral view about some moral issue than me, so they're a freaking monster and they don't even deserve to be allowed in public. Okay, well, I'm not going to like that very much. But that's a bad attitude that I would have if someone was a realist or a relativist. I wouldn't care about the meta ethics part. The issue that he's drawing attention to seems to be the ostensible tension between the two. And that's what I'm objecting to, not to the idea that people are super intolerant of like trivial or minor moral differences. And, there's various types of intolerance towards other people's moral views that, there's an intolerance where you're like, hey, I find your views objectionable. I don't want them to be enacted. And I want to argue with you about them and not just leave you alone. I don't want you to impose your views. And then there's one where you're like, cancel the person, don't allow them in public. And then whether or not I would support any of that or whether I think any of the rest of us should really depend on the content of the moral view. Like if a person has a slightly different view on like tax policy, it'd be kind of ridiculous to banish them from polite society. But if the person is like trying to pass laws to like legalize non-consensual cannibalism, like, hey, it's now legal to just run up and take a bite out of somebody and, bring your ranch. Okay. Yeah. I don't know that I don't think we should be particularly tolerant of that. I don't want those laws. I think they're very bad. So it's really going to depend on what these students are saying. So I don't have enough context. Oh, right. So experimental philosophy, I think this is Josh Knobe, who I'm a big fan of, really a big influence on me getting into the work that I do. He says, work in experimental philosophy suggests that the thing you're pointing to is not just about teaching meta-ethics in 2025. For basically all questions on which philosophers are divided, we find that ordinary folks have conflicting intuitions. So the implication here is that there's some kind of conflicting intuitions. I don't think there are. There's no conflict between being a relativist and having unshakable moral convictions and not liking moral disagreement. So here he says, yeah, a lot of the focus really is on the conviction part. So Henry says, yeah, I fully agree, though it'd be interesting to track generational changes too. My strong impression is that my students in the late 2000s and early 2010s had somewhat more that they were still moral relativists and meta ethics. That roughly coincides with my experience, although I don't have a ton of it. But that is the general kind of vibe that I got myself. Felipe Antoine Hoyek says, I was absolutely floored by this when I started teaching in 2019. I have no idea how you can hold these two beliefs in your head at the same time and not just explode from the cognitive dissonance. What's the dissonance? I'm an anti-realist. I have unshakable moral convictions. Like, I'm not even a relativist. I don't even think morality is relative or culturally constructed. I think there are no stance-independent moral facts. My moral standards reflect my convictions, and that's it. And some of them are completely unshakable. Where's the dissonance? I'm not experiencing any dissonance. What's the problem? And there are moral disagreements. I would be completely, totally intolerant if someone comes along and says, "Hey, they're going to bring back genocide." Yeah, no tolerance for that. What's the tension? What's the inconsistency? I don't know what it's supposed to be. Oh, right. We're getting some more meta ethics here. Henry says, absolutely. It's weird that students can hear J.L. Mackey's error theory, there are no ethical truths, and be totally unfazed. Yet, when asked to consider Nozikian libertarianism, find it absolutely morally abhorrent. Why is that weird? So, yeah, okay, so maybe there's no stance independent moral facts if Mackey's right. Yeah, no big deal. But then find Nozikian libertarian. Like, I'm not a fan of Nozick. Like, don't have a problem with error theory. I'm not an error theorist because I think it gets the descriptive account of ordinary moral language incorrect. So I reject error theory. But considering whether error theory is true, yeah, could be. No big deal. But then considering Nozikian's views, yeah, not a fan. I don't like them. What's weird about that? One of them is a metaethical view. You could almost any metaethical view could turn out to be true. What practical relevance does that make? No big deal if you're an error theorist or not. Whereas the idea of someone imposing, like, think about what would happen if error theory was true. Fucking nothing. Nothing would happen. You could just keep doing the same things you're already doing. So what? Whereas if we try to enact or like, how would you even enact error theory? What would you do? It's not even a theory about like what you should do. It's not a prescriptive theory. It's a descriptive account of how people speak and the metaphysical implications of implicit commitments in their language. Now, you could take some sort of implications from that and do something about that. You might think, since our moral language is systematically false, maybe we should abolish morality or revise moral language. But none of those are like logical entailments of the view. Whereas Nozikian views are prescriptive views. They're views about how we ought to structure society. And if the proposal is we should structure society in a way that you find abhorrent, yeah, I don't find anything remotely weird about this. Yeah, I'm not seeing what the issue is. All right. So Matt Olma says, could the culture relativist potentially push back against opposing ethical beliefs by pointing out that the other party's moral position is based on false empirical beliefs? The other party holds contradictory moral beliefs. Yes, they can also just push back on moral beliefs that they don't like. They could just object to other people's moral standards. There's no issue with this. There's no issue with being an appraiser relativist or a constructivist of all sorts of kinds and disagreeing with other people's moral standards. All right. So Christopher Landau says, this is intriguing. I wonder if secular ethics can resolve this revulsion concerning disagreement. Why do we need to resolve it? Some revulsion is probably good. My take within theological ethics is that only with a foundational commitment to mutual love can disagreement become effective. What? Is that the guy with the universal love theory? All right, let's keep going. Krishang Arjun says, sorry if I butchered the pronunciation. Strong convictions aren't necessarily precluded by moral relativism. I wouldn't even include the necessarily. They're just not precluded by relativism. There isn't even an implication or suggestion if you're a relativist that you should be any less committed to your moral standards than a realist. It takes some effort to justify, but one can passionately defend one's ideals while understanding that they're almost entirely arbitrary and the result of cultural influence and evolution. What's the effort? It takes me exactly zero effort at all. So Henry says that's true, but as Hoyek pointed out in this thread, it relegates moral disagreement to something like aesthetic disagreement. I prefer Mozart to you, and you prefer Beethoven, you monster. Yeah. So what? So why is that a problem? Yeah. So there's some good stuff that follows here. Evan says, is that actually confusing? People dislike different things, and that is what morality is. And 2, I dislike thing X, and I hate people who support thing X because they are immoral. See item 1. Yeah, so I just agree with Evan. And then Henry says, the problem is that this sets morality on the same footing as, e.g., aesthetic disagreement. I like strawberries, you like raspberries. Well, I might hate you for your preference. I can't claim any high ground to justify it unless I think there are objective facts to back that up. This is a big problem. This is where I really have an issue with what he's saying here. Okay, the problem is that this sets morality on the same footing as aesthetic disagreement. The same footing in what regard? So there are a number of potential differences between moral judgments and aesthetic judgments. First of all, you have the metanormative difference with whether or not you're a realist or an anti-realist about the domain in question. Now, let's say, for the sake of argument, that we're all anti-realists about aesthetic judgments of like about art and beauty and taste, let's say in food and music and movies and that sort of thing. We don't think that they're stance-independent facts, and perhaps we think that whether you're expressivist or a subjectivist or whatever, you think it's a matter of a stance-independent truth. If my stance is that chocolate tastes good, it tastes good according to my standards. If you think it tastes bad, then it tastes bad according to your standards. Nobody's right or wrong here in any objective or stance-independent sense. It's just that there's facts about my preferences and facts about your preferences. So let's say that's our view about aesthetics. Okay, so he says here, the problem is that this sets morality on the same footing as aesthetic disagreement. No, it doesn't. So the reason why is that it's only setting them on the same footing metanormatively if you're going to be some type of subjectivist about morality and gastronomy or aesthetics or taste preferences. Let's use the term taste preferences. There's stance-dependent moral facts, there's stance-dependent taste facts. Now, there are other ways in which they tend to differ in practice. So there's at least 3 different dimensions on which they could differ. One is the metanormative one. Now, we're agreeing for the sake of argument, let's treat them both as the same. We're going to be anti-realist about both, some type of subjectivist, stance-dependent theorist about both. Okay, so now the idea is they're on the same footing. Okay, well, they're on the same footing in that respect. And that might seem weird at that point. You might think, well, hold up. If you have, just because you prefer pineapple on pizza, that wouldn't justify forcing everyone else to eat pineapple on pizza. Just because you like Taylor Swift, it doesn't mean you should go around and like take over people's Spotify accounts and delete all their playlists and say, no, only Taylor Swift. This is a misunderstanding about the implications of the view. The difference with respect to taste preferences and with respect to moral preferences is that taste preferences, at least typically, are limited in scope. The scope is yourself. So I prefer to listen to certain kinds of music. I don't have a preference about what music you listen to. And so it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for me to go around trying to force you to listen to the music I like. I listen to the music I like because I like listening to it. I don't have any particular preference for you to listen to music that I like because I like it. I'm not enjoying the music when you're listening to it. But it's at least possible in principle for me to insist everyone share my same preferences. And in that case, I could have the preference everyone ought to listen to Taylor Swift, and then I could go around forcing everyone to listen to Taylor Swift, right? There's no contradiction. There's no tension. That's weird, but there's not an issue with that in terms of like the logic or internal coherence of it. It's a weird view. But see, the primary difference here is a difference of scope. And for whatever reason, when people are criticizing relativism, they'll think that if you equate relativism in terms of its metanormative characteristics, that the moral facts are stance-dependent in the same way that aesthetic facts are stance-dependent, that this somehow means that you would have to limit the scope of them to only yourself. So if you think murder is wrong, fine, don't murder. But who are you to impose your anti-murder stance on other people if it's just like an aesthetic stance? That's the problem. Just like it in what respect? If you only think it's like it in terms of its metanormative characteristics, it does not follow that it's also like it in terms of its scope. So your taste preferences, your aesthetic preferences, can be limited in scope to your own conduct. Now, again, in principle, they could apply to other people. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, our taste preferences are about our own personal conduct. That doesn't follow that your moral standards have to be about your own conduct. You can have preferences about what other people do. And so you could have both your moral standards and your aesthetic standards are stance dependent. There's no stance independent moral or aesthetic truths. There's no objective truth in either domain. Nobody can be right or wrong in that respect. But your taste preferences apply to your own conduct, but your moral preferences are preferences about how everybody everywhere in the whole universe acts. You can simply have a preference. Nobody anywhere tortures anybody. And you can act on that preference. If you see someone trying to torture somebody else, you can try to stop them. There's no contradiction. There's no tension. There's no inconsistency. It's not you. It would make no sense to say, hold on, because aesthetics and morality are, because they're on the same footing, you have to treat them the same way in terms of their scope. Nope. Because the fact that both of them are relativistic or anti-realist does not require them to be identical in terms of scope. It's totally logically consistent to say, I'm an anti-realist about taste, and my taste preferences apply to me. I'm an anti-realist about morality, and my moral preferences apply to literally everybody. You better follow my moral preferences, and if you don't, I'm going to try to force you to. I'm going to pass laws to impose my standards on you. Too bad if you don't like it. There is no inconsistency. There is no problem with that. And for whatever reason, critics of morality, of moral relativism, seem to like mix the two up. Finally, the third characteristic that I mentioned is importance. So my favorite color, you could probably guess, purple. I love the color purple. Now, if I had to have a blue background or a blue light behind me, no big deal. I like blue. I like orange. I like green. I like most colors. I'd be fine with most other colors. I don't have a strong desire to like forcibly change everything in the world to purple. I also have taste preferences. I like vanilla ice cream more than chocolate ice cream. But chocolate ice cream is fine. I'll eat it. I like pineapple on pizza. I don't always like it on pizza, but I'll eat it on pizza. If you took the pineapple off my pizza and said you don't like it, let's say I'm trying to order pizza with a group of friends and most of them hate pineapple on pizza. I'm not going to say it's got to be, you must have pineapple on pizza. If you don't have pineapple on pizza, I'm going to conquer your lands and just pillage your villages. That's ridiculous. I don't care that much about having pineapple on pizza. But if you said, hey, like your group of friends said, hey, we're going to go out and like slaughter people for fun. Okay, now I'm going to try to stop them. So I care more about my moral standards than I do about my taste preferences. So that's the third characteristic on which your moral standards and your taste standards can differ. You can just care more about them. You're more committed to them. You care more about them. They're more important to you. And so when you shift around the meta-normative characteristics of your moral standards and your aesthetic standards, that has nothing to do. It's completely orthogonal to how much you care about those standards and who those standards apply to. And there's absolutely no inconsistency in being an anti-realist about morality and caring deeply about your moral standards and holding that your moral standards apply to literally everybody. No inconsistency. And so when someone says they're on the same footing as aesthetics, they often give the misleading and I would say downright false impression that you have to treat it like aesthetics in other respects, and that there's something weird about this, that there would be something weird about imposing your opposition to torture on other people or objecting to other people committing murder if you think it's a matter of preference because you don't impose your like preference for strawberry ice cream on other people. This is just a misunderstanding about the implications of these views. And I think that's what's happening here. I'm sorry to say about Henry Shevlin, because again, he's a philosopher. I've heard good things about him, but I think that there's a misunderstanding lurking behind these remarks. So, because look at what he says. He goes on to say, I like strawberries, you like raspberries. Well, I might hate you for your preference. I can't claim any high ground to justify it unless I think there's an objective fact to back that up. If you're a relativist, you don't need, so like this idea, I can't claim any high ground to justify it. What does that even mean? So if I have a preference that the people around me don't torture or steal or lie or commit murder, and I decide to act on that preference, why would I need to, like, I could claim a high ground relative to my standards. Like, again, it really depends on what you mean by that. It's just unclear what he means by that. But he says, unless I think there are objective facts to back it up. I don't need objective facts to back up the imposition of my standards on others. Why would I? So, as someone that more or less has a view like an appraiser relativist, I simply deny that I need in any way a objective standard to back up the imposition of my opposition to genocide. I mean, think about what it would mean if there were no stance-independent moral facts. They're just objective morality. There's no objective morality. There's no stance-independent moral facts. Should we just stand by idly if people commit genocide because we can't back it up and take the moral high ground? Fuck that. I'm going to try to stop genocide anyway. What's the moral realist going to do? Are they just going to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't back it up. I can't justify stopping you. Justify what? You have to justify it according to a stance independent standard, or you're not allowed to stop genocide? I'm going to stop genocide because I don't want people to commit genocide. Like if I'm in a position to stop it. I mean, in practice, I don't get to do shit. I'm very powerless. But the reason I oppose bad things and would stop them when I'm in a position to do so is because I'm against them, because I have a preference that they not occur. And if moral realism were false, which I think it is, I still have the preference and I'm still going to act on it. Now, the question then for moral realists is, suppose moral realism is false. What do? Do you stop caring about torture and genocide and slaughters because you can't take the moral high ground? Who gives a flying fuck about the moral high ground if someone's committing genocide? I don't care. We should stop them anyway. Who cares? Why do we need realism to justify stopping people? So weird, so weird. And so, what I find especially weird about all of this is when you consider the implications of realism versus anti-realism. I actually think it's the realist view that is profoundly strange. It's like you need the universe's approval. It needs to be written into the fabric of the cosmos for you to be justified to stop people from torture or genocide. Why do I don't give a shit about the universe's approval. Why? I don't need it. I don't care. What about you? What do you care about? Are you unshakably anti-genocide? Because I'm so anti-genocide that if the stance independent moral fact said you must commit genocide, it's required of you. Morally speaking, it's required. Well, then fuck the moral facts. Screw the moral facts. I'm anti-moral then. I'm a morally bad person then, in that case. I don't care what the moral facts are. I care about my convictions. So if anything, arguably, yeah, as an anti-realist, you could have super duper unshakable convictions. And I say good. And I say good riddance to moral realism. If someone just thinks, yeah, I'm going to outsource what I'm willing to do to whatever is on that list of inscrutable rules, well, I have some concerns about that, because if you're not even sure what's on the list, so you're just willing to do whatever it turns out is on the list. Oh, well, what if you go through this a priori reasoning process and it turns out you can arrive at those being the moral facts? Who gives a shit? Why do you care? I act based on my values, and I'm against the things that I prefer not happen. And I'm so against them, I don't give a damn what the moral facts are. Sorry for the profanity, but this stuff it gets me worked up. It gets me worked up because it bothers me, this constant framing of anti-realist and relativist views, as though it's the anti-realists, the relativists, that is like morally questionable, dubious people. I just had a blog post where someone was saying, like anti-realists have to be psychopaths. It's freaking nonsense, complete nonsense, total nonsense to think that if you don't think there stands independent moral facts, that you've got to be some kind of psychopath. Whether you're a psychopath or not has to do with your attitudes and your character and the way you treat others. It has to do with like impulse control and manipulativeness and whether you feel guilt or remorse. It has nothing to do with your standards on metaethics. So I think that there's something very strange about the remark that he makes here. Let's look at the responses to it. But, well, let me take a drink. I'll look at the chat and then we'll get to the responses. All right. So Facundo says, it's curious to me that the author doesn't feel compelled to spell out the alleged contradiction. I don't know what the contradiction is. Remember, he just said it was bizarre, I think, if we go back to the original post. So there's supposed to be, at the very least, some tension or inconsistency of some kind. I don't know that there's supposed to be a contradiction. But yeah, he not only it seems obvious to him, but apparently he wants to talk only to people who see it. What do you mean he only wants to talk to people that see it? I don't think he said that either. So Facundo says we should just ask him to spell out the alleged contradiction. We should insist that he does. I'd really like to know what he thinks the inconsistency or problem here is, because it's still unclear to me what it's supposed to be. Dante says, "Hey, can you find that, Dantes? Who said that and where? Because I'll go back and have a look at that." So Dante says, someone in that thread also commented that the undergrads merely base their moral judgments on their feelings. But as a moral sentimentalist myself, I fail to see what's wrong with that. I completely fail to see what's wrong with that. Why would it matter if I base my moral judgments on my feelings? I base my taste preferences on my feelings. What's the problem? They're mere feelings. Oh, well, I merely base the fact that I love my family on my sentiments or my feelings towards them. What do I need an intellectual justification? Hey, what is your syllogism for why it's permissible for you to love your family? This is ridiculous. Philosophers over intellectualize way too much. Dea says, can a relativist, as described by Henry, just think that moral preferences, which are essentially moral truths, just think that moral preferences are much more important than aesthetic preferences? Yeah, exactly. Maybe you said that before I got to that point, but yeah, they could just consider them more important. What's the inconsistency? I don't think there is one. Yeah, so then Dea says, in this sense, moral truths still aren't on the same footing as aesthetic preferences. Well, they're on the same footing metanormatively, but they're not on the same footing in terms of scope, and they're not on the same footing in terms of importance. Sapir says, why would they need to be more important? They don't need to be more important. And I don't think that they always are. Some people are kind of morally ambivalent about some moral stuff. Digital Gnosis, AO. What's up? Are you still around? I don't know when you said this, 7:34. Okay, this is just 6 minutes ago. If you're still around, you're welcome to pop up and join me if you want. Blabbit says, I've heard many moral realists say they would not be anti-murder, genocide, etc. if moral realism turned out to be false. That's really weird, and that's pretty concerning. Matt says, moral lens crossover content, please. I think we're planning some stuff now, so we're going to have some of that. I don't impose my standards on others because of some objective high ground. I do it because I want to achieve what I value. I can be convinced to act differently only if it gets me more of that. Exactly. So when he says here, well, I might hate you for your preference, I can't claim any high ground to justify it unless I think there are objective facts to back it up. Okay, so let's say I can't claim any high ground to justify it unless there are objective moral facts to back it up. Let's say that's true. Okay, well, so what? Then I can't claim any high ground to justify it. And what's the problem? So I can't justify it. Oh, well, turns out I don't think my preferences need justifications. I don't care about that. I mean, what's the justification? Think about your favorite color, your favorite food. What's your justification? What's your philosophical argument for why that's the best food? You just have a preference for it. You don't need an argument. So I just reject the very notion that I would need any kind of justification in the first place. Anxurious says, okay, but many people are against, say, abortion, and it would be their preference that it be banned. Pro-abortion, anti-abortion, or just preference versus preference. That's correct. That's what I think is going on. I think it's conflicting preferences. Mason Colbert says, which is more psychopathic, having ethical values grounded on you and your community values, so whatever the Platonic forms decide is moral, regardless of our interests. Did you mean or? Yeah, I mean, so there's an issue potentially with both, because if your ethical values are grounded on your culture and community could be super psychopathic. They could do human sacrifice. That'd be bad. But the objective moral facts could turn out to be pro human sacrifice. That would be bad. So I don't think there's an objective standard for evaluating whether these things are good or bad. When I say they're bad, I'm talking about my standards. I'm against human sacrifice. I don't know about everybody in the audience. Okay, Dantes. Yeah, I'll go back and look for it. Nathan says, I need to make food. It's late for me. Fair enough. Just let's do a stream sometime soon. I had a week where I wasn't doing much, so I'm back into it. Okay. Clashman the Third says non-naturalist moral realism should be called brute fact command theory, since the only work realism does is fix whatever the fundamental ground levels are, like pain is bad. Yeah, it could be called brute fact command theory. It's kind of like that. Like there's these brute facts and you're required to follow them. That sense of required is so weird though. So like if you're required to follow a law and you don't, there's consequences. If you're required to follow these stance independent moral facts and you just don't, there's no consequences. Like nothing happens. So they're one of the most useless things in the world. They have no teeth. They don't really have any. So, philosophers will talk about them having like genuine authority. So genuine authority is authority that is completely unenforceable and has no implications. So what all the culturally constructed fake authority, like if I speed and I get pulled over by the police, it's not like objectively right for them to ticket me. It's a culturally constructed fact that I'm violating the local laws. So that's not real authority. Real authority where I could get thrown in jail, that's not real authority. But real authority is authority that has no implications if you ignore it. What the hell? So real authority is the completely ghostly authority that has no consequences. It's very bizarre. All right, Nathan says he'll DM me tomorrow with stuff. Great, so we'll do that. All right. So let's get back to the commentary here. So Slag says, incorrect. Your position fails to account for the fact that sentient beings have conscious experience of consequences. Okay, I don't know what that's about. Yeah, not really. None of these comments are doing much for me. So this person says the comments on this one are a really good example of the problem. I don't know what the problem is supposed to be. This doesn't seem like such a difficult circle to square. See, what I don't like are even people that are like, hey, I don't really see a problem here, are treating it as though there's an apparent problem. Not only am I denying that there is any tension or inconsistency or contradiction in being a relativist or thinking morality is culturally constructed and having unshakable moral convictions and opposing, having like a really nasty attitude towards certain kinds of moral disagreement. Not only am I saying there's no inconsistency, contradiction, or tension, I'm saying it doesn't. I don't even think it looks like there's one. I think the people that are seeing one here are making a mistake. I think the problem is them, not the people that have these attitudes. All right. So let's try to find that remark that, what was it? Dantes referenced. Was it here? No, this is the one I was just looking at. Oh, there's so many threads here. There's threads within threads within threads. I'm still looking. That's interesting. This person says, in my view, the concept of an objectively right morality is almost incoherent. Yeah. 1 point on the scoreboard for unintelligibility thesis. Very similar to my own view. I can't think of anything that could give one system of morals legitimacy as the one true morality. I don't see any point in mourning a thing which never existed, so I'm pretty fine with this. Okay. Yeah, I'm not finding that remark. See if there's more in this thread. Rain says, saying that morality is culturally constructed and relative to me supports the idea that they would still have some sense of morality. Like, still have. As if you like, hey, if you're a realist, you definitely have a sense of morality. But if you think morality is relative or culturally constructed, you can still have a sense of morality. Why the sense that there's something lesser or like, maybe you wouldn't though? No, there's this is not an issue. Since they're individuals which are influenced by at least one culture, I think their belief is that there's no intrinsic uniform morality. Yeah. So okay. I'm not seeing more replies there. There's a bunch of replies here. It's the unfazed stuff. Trying to find the stuff that Dantes had referenced. Was there a response to this? All right. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. So Dantes, I don't know where what you referenced. What was it that you had talked about? Yeah. Well, I can't find it, so I'm going to keep going. All right. So we already went through this. Some people are taking this as a political thing, not really my interest here. ASM says, based on my teaching experience in scientific disciplines, I believe this problem is not just an ethical issue, but also reflects a lack of understanding or neglect of basic logic, e.g., contradictions in most undergrads, which is highly concerning. And then Henry says, absolutely. So is the implication here that there's a contradiction? If so, what is the contradiction? I'd really like to know if there is a contradiction. I think it's linked to a decline in critical self-reflection as an epistemic virtue, perhaps due to kind of outsourcing of conscience from the self. I don't know why he thinks that. I don't think so. So Henry says, yeah, see, he says this wasn't intended as a political dunk at all. The main striking contrast is undergrads I taught 10 years ago who are thoroughgoing relativists, different strokes for different folks. Yeah, there's just not you could be a relativist and be pro-tolerance. You could be a relativist and be anti-tolerance. What's the issue? Okay, we got this here. The everything is relative argument. Yeah, so moral relativism is not the view that everything is relative. So that's a bad objection to this. So just because you think morality is relative doesn't mean you think everything is relative. So if you want to check whether the students think everything is relative, fair enough. Maybe that's going to be a fairly unsophisticated or underdeveloped view among undergrads, but is that what students think? We'd have to see some evidence of that. Someone just saying frustrating. No, not frustrating. All right. There's so much work to do. Yeah, the work to do is the work I'm doing, which is critiquing bad objections to moral relativism and anti-realism more generally. All right. That sounds like nihilism. Relativism is not nihilism, so that's not true. This person just says relativism is all the rage these days. Good, because relativism is closer to the correct answer than realism. People trying to offer psychological explanations. Of course, there's no evidence for them, so they're at least not very good evidence. This person says, this is sadly the truth. I've been a vocal critic of the modern liberal value system, which is full of contradictions like this. Again, what's the contradiction? What is the contradiction? My God. What is the contradiction? I really want to know. Dantes, yeah. Oh, Cult of Feeling. I remember that. I think I saw that. That sounds familiar. More stuff on politics. Wow, there is just so much here. I'm going to have to do a blog post about this where I start going through this. I'm going to have to more carefully look through this. I think we should leave it there and look at our next thread. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at the next one. So this is from Ratio Christie, and it's a book coming out called The Moral Argument for God by David Baggett. So we're going to move on. So I'm going to reach out to Henry and see if we could set up a conversation. I don't know if he does like YouTube stuff and would be willing to talk, but I'd love to talk about what exactly he meant there. Maybe I'm not understanding it. And maybe there's something there that we could find common ground on. This happened with, if you remember, Derek McAllister, where we did end up finding common ground on students often having underdeveloped and poorly articulated views, and there being issues with those views. But often I think that philosophers are too quick to move between underdeveloped or confused or like problems with student views and then problems with the views themselves. So people will take, students have these conflicting views about relativism. And then the implication is sometimes that like relativism is a stupid or bad view. And that doesn't follow. Okay, so there's this new book coming out on the moral argument for God. David Baggett is a big proponent of the moral argument. He doesn't use a deductive one. I think he uses an inductive one. I don't know. I can't remember if it's inductive or abductive. But in any case, it's not a deductive one. So he doesn't use like the William Lane Craig argument. And they're giving a sneak peek of some remarks. They're giving a sneak peek of what's in the book, and they make some remarks here. So I'm going to critique some of these. What was the first one I highlighted? All right, so take a look at this one. It says, all in all, moral realism makes best sense of deep-seated moral intuitions and a moral experience closely considered. It deserves to be taken seriously and should not be given up too easily. So, as you know, this is something that I commonly criticize. Look at the remark. All in all, moral realism makes the best sense of deep-seated moral intuitions. Whose deep-seated moral intuitions? So what you have here are these claims where there's no qualifications, there's no caveats, there's no quantification. They'll just say intuitions. Like imagine if I said, hey, we need an explanation of sightings of Bigfoot. Imagine if I phrase it as like our detection of Bigfoot. Whose detection of Bigfoot? Like there's a few crackpots and weirdos that say that they've seen Bigfoot. Maybe not crackpots, but they think they saw Bigfoot. I don't know. I haven't seen Bigfoot. Have you? So just because there's some unspecified number of people that say that they have some intuition doesn't mean that the best explanation is those intuitions are correct. What about all the people that don't? I don't have these intuitions. Do most people have these intuitions? You know what I'm going to say. That's an empirical question. And we do have research trying to figure out if people are moral realists or anti-realists. We don't have good evidence that most people are realists or that they have realist intuition. So this is underspecified, and philosophers do this a lot. Well, they'll just say stuff like intuitions. Intuitions are things people have. This is a bit like talking about tastes, as if everybody has the same taste, or without specification of who's doing the tasting. And of moral experience. I do not have realist moral experiences. I don't have any memory of ever having them. So I don't know what realists are talking about. This is something unique to them. All right. So, you get the standard stuff here. Moral obligations dictate to us what we ought to do. They are not mere suggestions. There is something inescapable about them, categorical, authoritative. I was just talking about this. So they're inescapable. Okay, so let's say that there's these stance independent moral facts. I can't escape them. I can't get away from them. Okay, now, and let's say that one of them is like, I have to donate 20% of my money to charity. Now let's say I just don't do that. So I can't escape the rule. I'm subject to it. It's authoritative. And so I'm subject to it. And now I just don't do it. I go, hey, you know what? I know those are the moral rules. So I don't care. I'm not going to follow them. What happens? Nothing. Nothing happens if you break these rules. So what the hell kind of authority is that? How are they inescapable? Imagine I did this. I'm like, hey, I have this inescapable net. I'm going to throw it over you. And I go, huh, gotcha. Now the net is inescapable. You're in the net. In fact, I did throw this net on everybody in the audience. If you're watching this, I'm very sorry. You're caught in the net. There's no escape from the net. You can never escape from the net. And I have total control over you now. It's a mind control net. Now I control your mind. Now, I control your mind, but it has no practical impact on anything you do. You think I'm going to control you, but you do all the things you were going to do anyway. And my net that's restricting your movement, it restricts it to the confines of the universe. So you can go anywhere you want in the universe. That's not inescapable. So if you're, hey, I've captured you inside all the possible spaces you could move. This is exactly like these inescapable moral facts. Like the fact that you are not complying with them there's no functional difference between that and escaping them. What's the difference? There is no difference. So like they're inescapable, but they don't do anything if you don't comply with them. What would be inescapable is if you were like locked in an adamantium cube and you couldn't move. That's an actual restriction of your motion. That's actual inescapability. Or there could be like a inescapability. It doesn't have to be physical space. I could say, hey, like let's say you're a god and you say, hey, if you break this rule, I'll find you and I'm going to punish you. And so no matter where the person hides in the universe, if they break the rule, you show up and you like flick them in the head and you say, naughty. Okay, so now there's always going to be the punishment. You can't escape the punishment. That's real inescapability. But these stance independent moral facts, the inescapability is completely toothless. There's no practical consequences. This is a ghostly, useless kind of inescapability and authority. It's just nothing. It's nonsense. All right. Failing to discharge our obligations results in a condition of objective guilt. So let's say you fail to discharge your obligation. So you're objectively guilty. But that has nothing to do with how anyone treats you, what anyone does to you, what God does to you, how you personally feel. It has no practical consequences. So objective guilt is a kind of guilt that has no consequences. You cannot, in principle, observe the outcome of objective guilt. But non-objective guilt, that's the guilt where you feel bad or you're found guilty in a court and you're convicted and you're sent to prison. That's the non-objective guilt. Which one of those would you, if I said you have to pick one and call that real guilt? I'm going to call that latter category real guilt. Real guilt is the feeling I have when I feel bad about what I did. Real guilt is when I'm convicted. The judge bangs the gavel and the jury finds the defendant guilty on all counts. That's guilt. That's guilt that matters. But this kind of guilt, this is ghost guilt. It doesn't do anything. It does nothing. Okay. All right. There are some other comments I wanted to remark on here. Not all of them, though. I'm not seeing everything here. Oh, wow. Okay. There was another comment that they had made earlier that I wanted to remark about. But here it is. Take a look at this one. It is interesting and telling that even those who think moral language is nothing more than expression of feelings continue to use such language. The reason, most likely, is that they know that the import of moral language goes beyond the mere expression of emotions. This I thought was the most objectionable thing they said. The other was just a characterization. I'm just criticizing that view. But in this case, here they're saying, hey, so there's these people, like there's expressivists that think a moral claim like abortion is wrong. That just means something like abortion, boo. So what they say is they go on to continue using moral language, and then they offer an explanation. The most likely explanation is that they know it goes beyond just expression of emotions. What? So the idea here is if you're an expressivist and moral claims only express your emotions, you don't have any particularly good reason to keep using moral language, but you do. And so we need to explain that. So what's the explanation? You know, it's not really about expressing your emotions. This is a terrible claim to make. Why is it terrible? Because there's no particularly good reason to think that if you think that your moral claims only express non-propositional content, like emotions or maybe an imperative like don't steal, don't get an abortion, something like that, that you wouldn't have any reason to continue using moral language if that's what you thought about it. Why? But why would you not have a reason to continue using it? Our emotions are important to us. Hey, if you have you ever like banged your toe or hit, I don't know, injured yourself and you went, ow. Well, ow is just an exclamation. It just expresses your emotions. Well, once you recognize that, why say ow anymore? What's the point? You must know there's something beyond. Or if you go, why would you make that sound unless you thought something was objectively tasty? I mean, there's just no particularly good reason to think that if something is an expression of an emotion or some other non-propositional content, that if you came to believe that, you would lose the incentive or rationale for using a language. That just doesn't follow. And so there's no reason to try to offer an explanation about why they're really continuing to do it, because the very basis for supposing that they wouldn't have a reason to do that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the first place. So that was a few comments from this one. There's not much more in this thread that I wanted to comment on. But what I want to show in showing these Twitter threads is that misconceptions, bad objections, lots of problems with the way that people characterize and discuss metaethics, even from professionals in some cases, they abound. They abound on Twitter. They're all over Substack. They're all over published articles. They're in textbooks. They're in YouTube videos. They're over on Blue Sky. It never ends. And no matter how much I try to combat misunderstandings and bad objections to anti-realist views, to relativism, and to expressivism, and to error theory, it's just an endless avalanche of them. And I don't really feel, what frustrates me is I don't feel like I'm dealing with genuinely like challenging objections to these views, and I have to struggle to think, what's the right way to challenge this view? What's a good objection to this view? I'm dealing with just misunderstandings, mischaracterizations, and just simply bad arguments, presumptions that are unfounded. That most people are realists, that most people have realist intuitions. Unfounded. There's no good empirical evidence that any of that is true. It's just unfounded. You get presumption or characterizations of relativism as only being agent relativism. That's not appropriate. You should disambiguate. You get claims that there's tensions or inconsistencies or with anti-realist views. There's typically not. You get the assumption that if you're an anti-realist, you would be less motivated to care about your moral standards. Why? What's the argument for that? I've never seen a good argument for this. People just assume, assert, and you rarely see people sustain really good arguments for why these anti-realist views are as objectionable as they say that they are. What you typically get is people trying to show that there's internal contradictions, or that people that claim to be anti-realists aren't really anti-realists, or that they have catastrophic consequences, which is almost never the case. So what you get are a bunch of basically terrible objections to these views. I don't see a lot of good objections to anti-realist views. Even anti-realist views I don't endorse. I typically don't endorse anti-realist views because I think that they get ordinary moral language wrong. But that's not the object. Like, here's an objection to moral relativism. That's not what people mean when they make moral claims. There's empirical evidence that they actually speak like realists. That'd be a good objection, and then you present the evidence. You can just say, yeah, people are not relativists. That's not a good way to understand ordinary moral language. Well, why don't people give that objection? No, it's always like, relativists have contradictions, or they're not really relativists, or whatever. They're not good objections. All right, let's have a look at the chat. People talking to each other. The argument is that, I mean, which argument? Whose argument is this? Oh, I could stop sharing this. I'm ready to keep going. So I think I'll take a little break, and then I could pop a video on here and we could look at that. The argument is that one cannot have descriptions of the world without objective epistemic norms, and that if one has objective epistemic norms, one has objective moral norms. That is an argument people have used before. I don't know what like you're saying the argument, but I don't know what you're referring to. So here we have the claim. The argument is that one cannot have description of the world without objective epistemic norms. So I just deny that. So I don't believe that there's objective epistemic norms. I don't think that's any more plausible than objective moral norms. So why would I think that you can't have descriptions of the world without them? I've never heard a good argument for that. So I would just reject that. All right. And Sirius says, can one justify that food preferences are less important than moral I don't know what that means. Why would I need? It's like some things are just less important to me. So it's really important to me that my family is healthy and safe. It's not that important to me that I take another sip of my mint tea. So if someone said, what's your justification? Well, like, what are you asking for? Am I supposed to give some principled philosophical defense of my preferences and what I care about? What would that look like? I mean, one, I don't have one. And two, I don't think I need one. And three, I don't care to give one. And so if someone says, then you're not justified. Oh, well, then I'm not justified. I don't care. Now what? So I'm not justified. So what? I don't care. This is like, there's this quest for justification. What the hell is this? What are people trying to do with this? You said they're different in scope, right? Why should one give any meaning to scope? You could just care. Like, I don't want other people to murder, but I don't particularly care what food they eat. I just don't. Like, this is it's a descriptive psychological fact about my preferences. It's not appropriate to ask for justification for that. Like, I don't know, I got kind of a big nose. Like, imagine asking, what's your justification for having a big nose? I'm sorry, I was born that way. Well, I don't know if I was born with a big nose, but I was born with a genetic and developmental predisposition to growing a big nose. Not much I could do about that. I guess I could get plastic surgery if I wanted to. I don't want to. I'm fine with it. But like, it's just a fact. Like, it doesn't require any sort of justification. So it's the same thing. I have preferences and I have like, I got 10 fingers. What's my justification? Like, this is silly. I think it's almost like a category error to ask for justification for my preferences. They're not the sort of thing that calls for justification. James Apperson says, I remember being a realist. My answer to the title question, there is not any contradiction in that. Here. Yeah, there isn't one. All right. Oh, wow. So many comments. All right. Thanks, everybody. Friction says, damn, I'm way too late for any answer. Friction, I haven't heard from you, or it's like we haven't had a conversation. What, in like a couple years? It was like 2 years ago I was on your channel. What's up with that? How come I haven't been back on your channel? What's going on with your channel? What's going on with you? All right, everybody. I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to get a big drink because I really need one. And then we're going to review a video. Now, what video are we going to review? Ooh, this is a good one. All right. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. That's the current video that I'm in. I can't review myself reviewing myself. That would be insane. And then I know I saved one somewhere. So let me see where that is. Okay. Oh, there's another one. Oh, wow. I got so many videos. Is that a different video? Oh, okay. There's another video. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So many videos to review. Holy crap. Okay. Oh, yeah. No, that's just the same one as the other one. All right, cool. So I got 5 videos to review. Do you think we could review all of them? Because I do not. I think we'll get through one. All right, everybody. I'm going to take a quick break. You know what? Should I start a new stream? Will people come back if I start a new stream? That'll separate the videos. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to start another stream. So I'll take a little bit of a break and then I'll be back. I might lose viewers. That's okay. You can all check it out later. So I'll start a new stream to look at the videos. Okay. 5 deep review ones. Yeah, maybe I did, Nathan. Okay, everybody. Actually, yeah, should I do that? Or should I stick around? What do you think? Should I just stick it out and just do it all in one big video? Or should I close this one out and start a new video? What do you think? Oh, I'm getting more comments. Scott says that you may be interested in the history of heresy catalogs, early history of conflating a bunch of views on a bundle into a bundle has a genealogy going back to anti-Gnostic texts by Orthodox Christians. All right. Friction says new stream. You just want a new stream so you could try to get Lance loot. Yeah, better to separate different topics. Good enough reason. That was my reasoning too. All right, everybody. I'll be back probably in about 10 minutes because I'm going to need to take a quick break. And then I'll see you all there. So thanks everybody for being here. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully I get a chance to talk to Henry. Maybe some other people in that thread. If you see this and you're on Twitter, if someone's on, because I'm not on Twitter, so I can't interact with anybody there. Oh, actually, there was There was one funny post I wanted to find. Let me see if I could find it. Yeah, here it is. I'll show you real quick. Where is it? I just had it here. Check it out. I'll show you this last one and then I'll head out. I just thought it was funny that this person said, "Where is Lance Bush when you need him?" I'm on it, or I was on it over the past hour and a half. Okay, everybody. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, do all that stuff. Go over and check the Twitter thread. If you're on Twitter, you could jump in the conversation and you could argue with the people there. That would be great. I'm not going to go on there. Not my thing. But that is not true, Sapir. If it was, I might even say it was true, but it's not. All right, everybody. See y'all in a little bit.